Welcome back to the channel where we dive deep into the strategies that separate winners from losers, the successful from the struggling, and the powerful from the powerless. Today, we're going to explore one of the most profound pieces of wisdom ever written, a principle so powerful that it has shaped the destinies of emperors, built business empires, and continues to guide the most successful people on the planet. Over 2,000 years ago, a Chinese military strategist named Sun Tzu wrote something that would echo through the ages. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be in danger. These aren't just words on a page. This is a blueprint for victory in every aspect of life. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how to apply this ancient wisdom to transform your modern reality. But here's what most people don't realize. When Sun Tzu talked about knowing your enemy, he wasn't just talking about warfare. He was talking about understanding the forces that oppose you in every arena of life. Your competition in business, the market forces that determine your financial future, the psychological barriers that keep you stuck, the social dynamics that either elevate you or hold you back. The most successful people in the world, from tech billionaires to media moguls, from political leaders to business titans, they all understand this principle at a level most people never will. And that's exactly what we're going to break down today. Chapter 1. The true meaning of enemy. When you hear the word enemy, your mind probably jumps to someone who actively opposes you, someone who wishes you harm. But Sun Tzu's concept goes much deeper than that. In the context of the art of war, your enemy is anyone or anything that stands between you and your objectives. Think about Jeff Bezos in the early days of Amazon. His enemies weren't just other online retailers. His enemies were traditional bookstores, the logistics companies that could make or break his delivery promises, the investors who doubted his vision, the cash flow problems that threatened to kill his company before it could scale, and even the internal voice that told him he was crazy for leaving a lucrative Wall Street job to sell books online. Bezos didn't just compete with Barnes & Noble. He studied them obsessively. He understood their supply chain, their profit margins, their customer service weaknesses, their real estate costs. But more importantly, he understood their mindset. They saw themselves as bookstores. Bezos saw himself as building the everything store. That fundamental difference in vision became their weakness and his strength. Warren Buffett, one of the greatest investors of all time, built his fortune on this principle. When he evaluates a company to invest in, he doesn't just look at their financial statements. He studies their competitors with microscopic detail. He understands the entire ecosystem that company operates in. He knows which trends threaten their business model, which regulations could impact their industry, which technological changes could make them obsolete. But here's where it gets really interesting. Buffett also considers his own psychological biases as enemies. He knows that fear and greed are the two forces that destroy most investors. So he's developed systems to protect himself from his own emotional reactions. He's literally applied Sun Tzu's principle to his own mind. Your enemies in the modern world aren't just people. They're market conditions, technological disruptions, economic cycles, social trends, and yes, your own limiting beliefs and destructive habits. The people who transform their lives understand this. They don't just prepare for human competition. They prepare for every force that could derail their progress. Consider Elon Musk when he was building Tesla. His enemies weren't just other car manufacturers. His enemies were the entire automotive industry's resistance to change, the oil companies that had a vested interest in maintaining the status quo, the battery technology limitations that made electric cars impractical, the charging infrastructure that didn't exist, the consumer perception that electric cars were slow and boring, and the massive capital requirements that could bankrupt his company before they sold their first car. Chapter 2. The Intelligence Gathering System. Sun Tzu dedicated significant portions of the art of war to the importance of intelligence gathering. He categorized different types of spies and information sources, understanding that accurate intelligence was the foundation of all successful strategy. In today's world, this principle has evolved into something far more sophisticated and accessible. Take Mark Benioff, the founder of Salesforce. Before he built his company, he spent years studying the enterprise software industry. He didn't just look at the successful companies. He studied the failures. He understood why traditional software companies struggled with customer satisfaction, why their implementations took so long, why their costs were so high. Benioff gathered intelligence from multiple sources. He talked to frustrated customers. He studied competitors' employee reviews on Glassdoor to understand their internal weaknesses. He analyzed their financial statements to understand their cost structures. He attended industry conferences not to network, but to listen. He was building a comprehensive picture of an industry ripe for disruption. This intelligence gathering revealed something crucial. The enemy wasn't just other software companies. The enemy was the entire model of software delivery. Companies didn't want to buy servers, hire IT staff, and manage complex installations. They wanted solutions that worked immediately and scaled with their growth. This insight led to the software-as-a-service model that transformed not just Salesforce, but the entire tech industry. But it all started with systematic intelligence gathering about the forces opposing his vision. Reed Hastings applied this same principle when he was transforming Netflix from a DVD-by-mail service to a streaming platform. His enemies weren't just Blockbuster and other rental companies. His enemies were internet bandwidth limitations, content licensing costs, established relationships between studios and traditional distributors, and consumer habits that favored physical media. Hastings gathered intelligence on all these fronts. He studied internet infrastructure development trends. He analyzed content licensing deals. He researched consumer behavior patterns. He tracked the evolution of streaming technology. This comprehensive intelligence gathering allowed him to time Netflix's transformation perfectly, staying ahead of technological limitations while positioning the company before competitors understood the shift. But here's what most people miss. This intelligence gathering never stops. The most successful people have built systems for continuous learning about their competitive landscape. They're not just gathering information when they're planning a new venture. They're constantly updating their understanding of the forces that could impact their success. Bill Gates, even during his busiest years running Microsoft, maintained what he called think weeks. Twice a year, he would isolate himself with nothing but books, research papers, and strategic documents. He wasn't just learning about technology trends. He was studying regulatory environments, competitor strategies, market dynamics, and social changes that could impact Microsoft's future. This systematic approach to intelligence gathering allowed Microsoft to anticipate and respond to challenges before they became existential threats. When the internet emerged as a platform, Gates quickly understood that it would change everything about the software business. Microsoft's pivot to internet-focused strategies didn't happen by accident. It happened because Gates had built systems for understanding and responding to emerging enemies. Chapter 3: Psychological Warfare and Mental Models. One of the most sophisticated applications of Sun Tzu's principle involves understanding the psychology of your opponents. This isn't about manipulation or deception. It's about understanding how different people and organizations think, what motivates them, what they fear, and how they make decisions. Steve Jobs was a master of this psychological dimension. When he returned to Apple in 1997, the company was 90 days from bankruptcy. His enemies weren't just other computer manufacturers. His enemies were consumer perceptions that Apple was a niche player for creative professionals, developer ecosystems that ignored Mac platforms, retail channels that gave Apple minimal shelf space, and internal cultural problems that had made Apple reactive instead of innovative. Jobs understood that his primary enemy was commoditization. The entire computer industry had become focused on technical specifications and price competition. This played to the strengths of companies like Dell and HP, but it was killing Apple's differentiation. So Jobs studied the psychology of premium brands in other industries. He looked at how luxury car manufacturers, high-end audio companies, and fashion brands created desire for their products despite higher prices. He understood that people's relationships with technology were becoming more emotional, not less. This psychological insight led to the development of products that weren't just functional, but beautiful. The iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad weren't just technological achievements. They were psychological weapons against the commoditization of technology. Jobs understood that his real competition wasn't other technology companies. His competition was the consumer's willingness to accept boring, ugly, complicated devices. Consider how Reed Hastings used psychological warfare when Netflix was competing with Blockbuster. Hastings understood that Blockbuster's business model depended on late fees, which customers hated but tolerated because they had no alternative. He also understood that Blockbuster's executives were psychologically committed to their physical store model because it had made them successful for decades. Netflix's no late fees messaging wasn't just marketing. It was psychological warfare designed to highlight the most frustrating aspect of the Blockbuster experience. And when Blockbuster finally tried to eliminate late fees, they damaged their own profitability because their entire business model depended on that revenue stream. Hastings had identified a psychological weakness in his enemy's business model and exploited it perfectly. Blockbuster couldn't respond effectively without destroying their own economics. Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Associates, built the world's largest hedge fund by applying psychological principles to financial markets. Dalio understood that his enemies weren't just other investment firms. His enemies were the psychological biases that cause most investors to buy high and sell low, the groupthink that creates market bubbles, and the emotional reactions that prevent rational decision-making. Dalio developed systematic approaches for identifying when markets were driven by psychology rather than fundamentals. He studied how different cultures and generations responded to economic stress, how central banks made decisions under pressure, how political systems reacted to financial crises. This psychological intelligence allowed Bridgewater to profit during the 2008 financial crisis, while most other firms suffered massive losses. Dalio wasn't just predicting market movements. He was predicting human behavior under extreme stress. Chapter 4: Competitive Intelligence in the Digital Age. The Internet has revolutionized intelligence gathering, creating unprecedented opportunities for understanding your competition. The most successful people today have learned to use digital tools and platforms to gain insights that would have been impossible to obtain in previous generations. Brian Chesky, the co-founder of Airbnb, used digital intelligence gathering to compete against the entire hotel industry. He didn't just study hotel companies' financial statements and marketing strategies. He created fake bookings on his own platform to understand the customer experience. He analyzed thousands of reviews to identify pain points in traditional hospitality. He studied social media conversations to understand changing travel preferences. Chesky discovered that his real enemy wasn't just hotels. His enemy was the entire concept of standardized, impersonal accommodation. Young travelers, especially millennials, were looking for authentic, local experiences that hotels couldn't provide. This insight allowed Airbnb to position itself not as a cheaper alternative to hotels, but as a completely different way to travel. The intelligence gathering also revealed regulatory challenges before they became serious threats. By monitoring local government discussions and community concerns, Airbnb could anticipate regulatory pushback and develop responses before competitors even understood the issues. Consider how Daniel Ek used digital intelligence to build Spotify. He wasn't just competing with other music streaming services. He was competing with music piracy, which offered consumers unlimited music for free. Traditional music industry responses to piracy had failed because they focused on legal enforcement rather than understanding consumer behavior. Ek studied why people chose piracy despite legal risks. The intelligence revealed that convenience and selection were more important than price. Pirates were willing to deal with complicated software and potential malware because legal alternatives were fragmented across multiple services with limited selections. This intelligence led to Spotify's strategy of offering both free and premium tiers, negotiating licenses for comprehensive music catalogs, and focusing obsessively on user experience. Ek understood that his enemy wasn't just other music services. His enemy was the friction that made illegal alternatives attractive. Modern entrepreneurs are using artificial intelligence and data analytics to gather competitive intelligence at unprecedented scales. They're analyzing competitor websites for pricing changes, monitoring social media for customer complaints, tracking job postings to understand strategic priorities, and using web scraping to monitor product launches and feature updates. The key insight is that intelligence gathering today isn't just about understanding what your competitors are doing. It's about understanding the systemic forces that shape your entire industry. Successful people are tracking regulatory changes, technological developments, demographic shifts, and cultural trends that could create opportunities or threats. Chapter 5: Economic Warfare and Market Positioning. Sun Tzu understood that the best victories are won without fighting. In business, this translates to positioning yourself so advantageously that competitors cannot effectively challenge you. The most successful entrepreneurs and investors have mastered this art of strategic positioning. When Amazon was expanding beyond books, Jeff Bezos applied Sun Tzu's principles to economic warfare. His enemy wasn't just other retailers. His enemy was the entire economic structure of traditional retail, which depended on physical locations, inventory management, and geographic limitations. Bezos understood that traditional retailers had massive fixed costs in real estate and inventory that Amazon could avoid. Instead of competing directly on price, Amazon reinvested every dollar of potential profit into infrastructure and market expansion. This created a cost structure that traditional retailers couldn't match without abandoning their existing business models. The strategy forced competitors into an impossible choice: maintain profitability and lose market share, or match Amazon's prices and destroy their own economics. Most chose the former, allowing Amazon to capture market after market without traditional price competition. This economic warfare extended to Amazon's relationship with suppliers. By controlling customer relationships and data, Amazon could dictate terms that favored their platform over traditional retail channels. Suppliers found themselves dependent on Amazon for access to customers, even as Amazon collected intelligence about their products that could be used for competitive purposes. Warren Buffett has built Berkshire Hathaway using similar principles of economic positioning. His enemy isn't other investment firms. His enemy is the need for liquidity that forces most investors to sell assets at unfavorable times. Buffett structured Berkshire's finances so they never have to sell investments due to external pressure. This allows him to buy assets when other investors are forced to sell, and hold positions until they reach their full potential value. The economic structure itself becomes a competitive advantage that others cannot easily replicate. Consider how Netflix used economic warfare against traditional media companies. Reed Hastings understood that his enemies weren't just other streaming services. His enemies were the windowing systems and licensing structures that made content expensive and delayed. Netflix's strategy involved changing the economics of content creation by funding original programming directly. This eliminated the middlemen who had made content expensive, gave Netflix ownership of valuable intellectual property, and created unique value that competitors couldn't offer. The economic positioning forced traditional media companies to compete by launching their own streaming services, which cannibalized their more profitable traditional distribution channels. Netflix had positioned the battleground in an arena where they were stronger and their enemies were weaker. Modern entrepreneurs are applying these principles to platform businesses, marketplace dynamics, and network effects. They understand that the goal isn't just to compete effectively in existing markets. The goal is to change the underlying economics so that traditional competition becomes irrelevant. Chapter 6: Technological Disruption as Strategic Advantage. Technology has become one of the most powerful weapons in modern competitive warfare. The most successful people understand that technological change doesn't just create new opportunities. It creates new categories of enemies and new requirements for strategic intelligence. When Mark Benioff was building Salesforce, his primary enemy wasn't other software companies. His enemy was the entire model of software ownership that required customers to buy servers, hire technical staff, and manage complex installations. Benioff understood that cloud computing would change the fundamental economics of enterprise software. Instead of competing within the existing model, he used technology to make that model obsolete. Salesforce customers didn't need to understand technology infrastructure. They just needed results. This technological positioning forced traditional software companies like Oracle and SAP to retrofit their products for cloud delivery, which required them to cannibalize their more profitable on-premise business. Salesforce had positioned the battle in an arena where established companies couldn't leverage their existing advantages. Elon Musk applied similar principles when building Tesla. His enemy wasn't just other car manufacturers. His enemy was the entire technological ecosystem that made electric vehicles impractical: limited battery range, slow charging times, inadequate charging infrastructure, and high manufacturing costs. Instead of competing within existing technological limitations, Musk invested in advancing the underlying technologies that constrain the industry. Tesla's Gigafactory strategy wasn't just about manufacturing cars. It was about controlling battery costs and supply chains that determined the economics of electric vehicles. The technological approach forced traditional automakers to compete in areas where they had no expertise. They understood internal combustion engines, but they didn't understand battery chemistry, software integration, or direct-to-consumer sales models. Consider how Google used technological superiority to dominate search and advertising. Larry Page and Sergey Brin understood that their enemies weren't just other search engines. Their enemies were the information overload and poor relevance that made internet search frustrating. Google's PageRank algorithm didn't just index web content. It evaluated the authority and relevance of that content based on how other websites linked to it. This technological approach provided search results that were dramatically better than anything competitors could offer. The technological advantage created a virtuous cycle. Better search results attracted more users attracted more advertisers, more advertising revenue funded better technology, and better technology further improved search results. Competitors couldn't break into this cycle without matching Google's technological capabilities. Modern entrepreneurs are using artificial intelligence, blockchain, biotechnology, and other emerging fields to create similar technological advantages. They understand that the goal isn't just to use technology to improve existing processes. The goal is to use technology to make existing approaches obsolete. The most successful people today are studying emerging technologies not just for their immediate applications, but for their potential to disrupt entire industries. They're positioning themselves to win. Chapter 7. Social and Cultural Intelligence. One of the most overlooked aspects of Sun Tzu's teachings involves understanding the social and cultural forces that influence behavior. In our interconnected world, these forces have become increasingly important for anyone seeking significant success. When Mark Zuckerberg was building Facebook, his enemies weren't just other social networking sites like MySpace and Friendster. His enemies were the social barriers that prevented people from connecting authentically online, concerns about privacy, skepticism about online relationships, and the technical complexity that made early social platforms difficult to use. Zuckerberg studied how people actually wanted to connect with each other. He understood that most social networking sites focused on meeting new people, but what people really wanted was to stay connected with people they already knew. This insight led to Facebook's focus on real identity and existing relationships. The social intelligence also revealed generational differences in technology adoption. Younger users were more willing to share personal information online, while older users needed more privacy controls and simpler interfaces. Facebook's product development reflected these insights, creating features that appealed to different demographic segments. This social positioning allowed Facebook to grow from a college platform to a global network while competitors remained focused on narrower use cases. The company had identified and addressed the fundamental social needs that drove online behavior. Reed Hastings demonstrated similar social intelligence when positioning Netflix. He understood that his enemies weren't just other entertainment companies. His enemies were the social stigma around binge watching, the scheduling constraints of traditional television, and the limited selection that forced families to compromise on entertainment choices. Netflix's cultural strategy involved normalizing binge watching by creating high-quality original content that was designed to be consumed in large blocks. The company studied viewing patterns to understand how people actually watched television when given unlimited choice and convenience. The social intelligence revealed that viewers preferred complete control over their entertainment experience rather than scheduled programming. This led to Netflix's strategy of releasing entire seasons simultaneously, which differentiated them from traditional networks and other streaming services. Oprah Winfrey built her media empire through sophisticated understanding of social and cultural dynamics. Her enemies weren't just other talk show hosts or media personalities. Her enemies were the cultural barriers that prevented honest conversations about personal growth, relationships, and social issues. Winfrey studied the psychology of her audience deeply. She understood that people were hungry for authentic connection and meaningful conversation in an increasingly superficial media landscape. Her approach to television reflected this understanding, creating programming that addressed emotional and spiritual needs rather than just entertainment. The cultural intelligence allowed Winfrey to build a brand that transcended traditional media categories. Her audience followed her from television to magazines to online platforms because they trusted her understanding of their deeper needs and aspirations. Modern entrepreneurs are using social media analytics, demographic research, and cultural trend analysis to understand the social forces that influence their markets. They're not just studying what people buy. They're studying how people think about themselves, their relationships, and their place in society. Chapter 8. Financial Intelligence and Resource Allocation. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of understanding the economic foundations of conflict. In modern business and investing, this translates to sophisticated understanding of financial structures, market dynamics, and resource allocation strategies. Warren Buffett's success comes largely from his ability to understand the financial characteristics that make companies superior investments. His enemies aren't just market volatility and poor-performing stocks. His enemies are the cognitive biases and emotional reactions that cause most investors to make poor decisions. Buffett studies the financial statements of potential investments with extraordinary detail, but he also studies the psychology of markets and the behavioral patterns of other investors. He understands that stock prices often reflect emotions rather than fundamental value, creating opportunities for patient investors with superior analysis. The financial intelligence extends to understanding how different types of businesses generate and use cash. Buffett favors companies with predictable cash flows, limited capital requirements, and competitive advantages that protect profitability. This preference reflects deep understanding of how financial characteristics translate to long-term investment performance. When Jeff Bezos was building Amazon, he demonstrated similar financial intelligence by prioritizing cash flow and market position over short-term profitability. His enemies weren't just competitors who were trying to match Amazon's prices. His enemies were the financial market's expectation for immediate profitability that could force premature strategic compromises. Bezos educated investors about Amazon's long-term strategy through detailed annual letters that explained how current investments would create future advantages. This financial communication strategy allowed Amazon to maintain access to capital while reinvesting aggressively in growth. The financial positioning also involved understanding how traditional retailers' cost structures limited their ability to compete. Amazon's variable cost model allowed them to scale efficiently while competitors struggled with fixed overhead costs that became increasingly burdensome as sales shifted online. Ray Dalio built Bridgewater Associates by developing systematic approaches to financial analysis that reduced emotional decision-making. His enemies weren't just market downturns and poor investments. His enemies were the psychological biases that prevent rational evaluation of financial opportunities and risks. Dalio's financial intelligence involves understanding how different economic conditions affect various asset classes, how central bank policies influence market behavior, and how geopolitical events create investment opportunities. This systematic approach allows Bridgewater to profit during market stress when most investors are losing money. Modern entrepreneurs are using financial modeling, data analytics, and economic research to understand the financial forces that shape their industries. They're not just managing their own finances effectively. They're understanding how financial trends create opportunities and threats across entire markets. The most successful people today are studying monetary policy, demographic trends, technological disruption, and regulatory changes that could affect the financial landscape. They're positioning themselves to benefit from financial dislocations that create opportunities for those who understand the underlying dynamics. Chapter 9. Regulatory and Political Intelligence. One of the most critical aspects of modern strategy involves understanding regulatory and political forces that can dramatically impact business success. The most successful people have learned to navigate and influence these systems effectively. When Travis Kalanick was building Uber, his enemies weren't just other transportation companies. His enemies were the regulatory systems that protected taxi monopolies, the political relationships that maintained the status quo, and the legal frameworks that prohibited ride-sharing services. Kalanick's strategy involved launching in cities before obtaining regulatory approval, creating consumer demand that made political opposition more difficult. The company studied local political dynamics to understand which arguments would resonate with different constituencies. The regulatory intelligence revealed that consumers' frustration with traditional taxi services created political opportunities for change. Uber positioned itself as representing consumer interests against entrenched special interests, which proved effective in many markets. However, the aggressive regulatory strategy also created enemies in government and traditional transportation industries. These enemies eventually contributed to Kalanick's departure from the company, demonstrating the importance of balancing regulatory disruption with political sustainability. Facebook's growth has been significantly influenced by regulatory and political dynamics. Mark Zuckerberg initially underestimated the political implications of Facebook's influence on information distribution and democratic processes. The company's regulatory challenges have forced significant changes in business practices, privacy policies, and content moderation systems. These changes have created competitive advantages for other platforms that learned from Facebook's regulatory difficulties. Modern tech entrepreneurs are studying regulatory trends, political cycles, and policy discussions that could affect their industries. They're not just complying with existing regulations. They're anticipating future regulatory changes and positioning their companies to benefit from or avoid potential restrictions. The most successful people are building relationships with policymakers, contributing to regulatory discussions, and developing business models that align with political and social trends rather than opposing them. Chapter 10. Personal Development as Strategic Advantage. Sun Tzu's principle of knowing yourself is often overlooked, but it's equally important as understanding external enemies. The most successful people have developed sophisticated self-awareness and personal development systems that give them strategic advantages. Tony Robbins built his personal development empire by understanding that people's primary enemies are often internal, limiting beliefs, destructive habits, emotional reactions that prevent rational decision-making, and psychological patterns that create self-sabotage. Robbins studied psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral change to develop systematic approaches for overcoming these internal enemies. His success comes from helping people identify and address the psychological barriers that prevent them from achieving their goals. The personal development intelligence extends to understanding how different people learn, what motivates different personality types, and how to create sustainable behavior change. Robbins has applied these insights to build a business that generates hundreds of millions in revenue annually. Ray Dalio has systematized personal development through Bridgewater's Principles culture, which encourages radical transparency and continuous improvement. Dalio understands that investment success requires overcoming the emotional biases and cognitive limitations that affect all human decision-making. The personal development system involves regular feedback, systematic analysis of decision-making processes, and cultural mechanisms that prevent groupthink and promote independent thinking. These practices have contributed to Bridgewater's superior investment performance over decades. Oprah Winfrey has built her brand around personal development and self-improvement. She understood that her audience's primary enemies were often internal: lack of self-confidence, unclear life purpose, relationship problems, and spiritual disconnection. Winfrey's approach to personal development involves helping people connect with their authentic selves and develop the courage to pursue meaningful goals. This focus has created extraordinary audience loyalty and business success across multiple media platforms. Modern entrepreneurs are using meditation, coaching, therapy, and other personal development tools to optimize their performance and decision-making capabilities. They understand that personal growth is not separate from business success. It's a fundamental requirement for sustainable achievement. The most successful people are continuously working on their emotional intelligence, stress management, communication skills, and leadership abilities. They treat personal development as seriously as they treat market research or financial analysis. Chapter 11. Building Competitive Moats. The ultimate application of Sun Tzu's principles involves creating sustainable competitive advantages that make direct competition irrelevant. The most successful people understand how to build what Warren Buffett calls economic moats around their positions. Amazon's moat isn't just its size or customer base. It's the network effects between customers, sellers, and logistics infrastructure that become stronger as the platform grows. Competitors can't replicate these advantages without building the entire ecosystem from scratch. Jeff Bezos understood that his enemies weren't just current competitors, but future threats that could emerge from technological change or new business models. Amazon's continuous reinvestment in technology, logistics, and new market categories creates multiple layers of competitive protection. Google's moat comes from the virtuous cycle between search quality, user data, and advertising effectiveness. Competitors can't offer better search results without access to the usage data that comes from having more users, but they can't get more users without offering better search results. Larry Page and Sergey Brin built this moat by understanding that their enemies weren't just other search engines, but any technology that could make search irrelevant. Google's expansion into mobile operating systems, cloud computing, and artificial intelligence represents strategic diversification beyond search. Apple's moat involves the integration between hardware, software, and services that create switching costs for customers. Steve Jobs understood that his enemies weren't just other technology companies, but the commoditization forces that made technology products interchangeable. The integrated ecosystem strategy means that Apple customers who invest in multiple Apple products become increasingly unlikely to switch to competitors. This customer loyalty provides pricing power and predictable revenue streams that competitors struggle to match. Netflix's moat has evolved from distribution advantages to content creation capabilities. Reed Hastings understood that his enemies weren't just other streaming services, but any company with valuable content and distribution capabilities. By investing in original programming, Netflix created content that competitors couldn't offer while reducing dependence on external content providers. The company's global scale allows them to amortize content costs across larger audiences than regional competitors. Modern entrepreneurs are building moats through network effects, data advantages, regulatory barriers, brand loyalty, and operational excellence. They understand that temporary competitive advantages are not sufficient for long-term success. The most successful people are constantly working to strengthen their competitive positions while preparing for new categories of threats that could emerge from technological or social changes. Chapter 12: Crisis Management and Adaptation. Sun Tzu understood that even the best strategies must adapt to changing circumstances. The most successful people have developed capabilities for responding effectively to unexpected challenges and opportunities. When the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted global commerce, different companies' responses revealed their strategic intelligence and adaptability. Companies that had studied their vulnerabilities and prepared for various scenarios adapted more quickly than those that had focused only on existing competition. Zoom's dramatic growth during the pandemic wasn't just luck. Eric Yuan had built the company with the understanding that traditional video conferencing solutions were complex and unreliable. When remote work became necessary, Zoom's superior user experience made it the obvious choice for millions of organizations. The crisis response demonstrated the importance of understanding not just current enemies, but potential future threats that could reshape entire industries. Companies that had prepared for remote work scenarios thrived while others struggled to adapt. Amazon's response to the pandemic showed the value of robust logistics and supply chain intelligence. The company's investments in warehouse automation, delivery capabilities, and inventory management allowed them to serve customers effectively when traditional retail struggled with closures and capacity limitations. Jeff Bezos had understood that his enemies included any disruption that could prevent Amazon from serving customers reliably. The pandemic preparations were part of a broader strategy for maintaining competitive advantages during various crisis scenarios. Netflix benefited from the pandemic as consumers increased their entertainment consumption, but the company's success reflected years of preparation for content delivery challenges. Reed Hastings had built global content distribution capabilities that could handle dramatic increases in usage without service degradation. The crisis management capabilities demonstrated the importance of understanding not just competitive threats, but operational risks that could affect business continuity. Companies with superior crisis intelligence were able to maintain or improve their competitive positions while others struggled. Modern entrepreneurs are building resilience through scenario planning, operational redundancy, financial reserves, and strategic partnerships that provide flexibility during unexpected events. They understand that crisis response capability is itself a competitive advantage. The most successful people are studying historical crises, monitoring emerging risks, and building organizational capabilities that can respond effectively to various disruption scenarios. Chapter 13: Long-Term Strategic Thinking. Sun Tzu emphasized the importance of strategic patience and long-term thinking. The most successful people understand how to balance immediate tactical needs with long-term strategic positioning. Warren Buffett's investment approach demonstrates the power of long-term strategic thinking. His enemies aren't just poor-performing investments, but the short-term pressures that force most investors to make suboptimal decisions. Buffett's long-term perspective allows him to invest in companies during temporary difficulties when other investors are selling. This contrarian approach has generated superior returns over decades because it takes advantage of market psychology rather than fighting against it. The long-term strategy also involves understanding how technological and social changes will affect different industries over time. Buffett has avoided investing in technology companies he doesn't understand, but he has invested heavily in companies that benefit from technological change without being disrupted by it. Jeff Bezos built Amazon with a similar long-term perspective. His enemies weren't just current competitors, but future threats that could emerge as technology and customer preferences evolved. Amazon's continuous reinvestment in new capabilities reflected this long-term strategic thinking. The long-term approach allowed Amazon to sacrifice short-term profitability for market position and capability development. This strategy required extensive communication with investors to maintain their support during periods of heavy investment and limited profits. Elon Musk's companies reflect extreme, long-term strategic thinking. His enemies aren't just current market conditions, but existential threats like climate change and space exploration challenges that require decades of sustained effort to address. Tesla's mission to accelerate sustainable transportation and SpaceX's mission to make humanity a multi-planetary species represent strategic thinking that extends far beyond typical business planning horizons. These long-term visions have attracted talent, capital, and customer loyalty that would be impossible with shorter-term objectives. The long-term strategic approach also involves building capabilities that will be valuable across multiple future scenarios. Musk's companies are developing technologies and expertise that could be applied to various challenges that may emerge over the coming decades. Modern entrepreneurs are balancing immediate market opportunities with long-term strategic positioning. They understand that sustainable success requires building capabilities and relationships that will be valuable regardless of how specific markets evolve. The most successful people are studying demographic trends, technological development cycles, environmental changes, and social evolution to understand how current strategic decisions will affect future opportunities. Chapter 14. Implementation and Execution Excellence. Understanding your enemies is only valuable if you can translate that intelligence into effective action. The most successful people have developed systematic approaches for implementing strategic insights consistently and effectively. Steve Jobs demonstrated exceptional execution intelligence throughout his career at Apple. His enemies weren't just competitors with similar products, but the organizational and operational challenges that prevented consistent delivery of superior customer experiences. Jobs built Apple's culture around obsessive attention to detail and relentless focus on customer experience. Every aspect of product development, manufacturing, marketing, and retail reflected systematic implementation of strategic intelligence about customer needs and competitive positioning. The execution excellence extended to supply chain management, retail store design, marketing campaigns, and customer service. Jobs understood that strategic advantages could be lost through poor implementation, so he developed organizational capabilities that translated strategic insights into consistent operational excellence. Amazon's success reflects similar execution intelligence. Jeff Bezos understood that his enemies included any operational failure that could damage customer trust or competitive position. Amazon's culture of customer obsession and operational excellence reflects systematic implementation of this understanding. The execution systems include detailed metrics for customer satisfaction, delivery performance, inventory management, and cost optimization. These systems allow Amazon to maintain strategic advantages while scaling across multiple markets and product categories. Netflix's ability to execute its streaming strategy reflected years of building operational capabilities for content delivery, recommendation algorithms, and customer interface design. Reed Hastings understood that strategic insights about consumer preferences were only valuable if they could be implemented through superior technology and operations. The execution excellence includes systematic testing of interface changes, continuous optimization of content recommendations, and global expansion strategies that adapt to local market preferences while maintaining operational efficiency. Modern entrepreneurs are building organizational capabilities for rapid testing.